There are some design attributes in watchmaking that have almost become synonym to comfort and wearability of the watch. For example, the thickness, or let's say the thinness of the watch, that doesn't only define engineering marvels for the watch manufacturer in fitting the caliber in a thinner case, but also represents a desired attribute for many wearers who prefer the watches to slip under the cuffs in a day-to-day use from the thinness of the case on offer. Then there's a second attribute of lightness in the weight that many times define and determine how comfortable the watch is on the wrist. As a watch enthusiast, you really enjoy wearing such a watch on the wrist and then prefer a watch that isn't heavy or top heavy enough that it doesn't stay balanced or in the center of the wrist. This is where the factor of weight distribution comes in handy, and a watch case with well-distributed weight not only stays in the center of the wrist, but you can wear it all day and you won't feel it to be uncomfortable or unbearable. And when a watch is offered with both attributes of thinness and lightness in weight, you would naturally lay very high expectations from it. And then the watch manufacturer really has to mess up the design big time, that despite all attributes that represent comfort and convenience, the watch turns out to be the other way around. When you look at Bulgari Octo Finissimo the first time, you instantly realize that it's anything but another regular watch with circular case and bezel. The case and the bracelet come with aggressive angles, corners, edges and profiles that are, put simply, nowhere else to be seen but some historic icons. When you talk about historic watches from the past that were also introduced with daring looks of angular design and case profile, you simply cannot not think of iconic Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. And since Royal Oak was octagonal in shape and was designed by the legendary jewelry designer and an icon of the time, Genta, when you factor in the hot horology characters, it was also the first watch in the world to offer the characters of jewelry and fine watchmaking in the flesh of steel. Before Royal Oak, the steel watches were all about sports, professional and tool form. Another name to echo your mind when talking about iconic watches from 70s designed by Genta is Patek Philippe Nautilus. Bulgari Octo very much offers not just the looks and vibe of Royal Oak and Nautilus due to its case shape and design, but it also incorporates the attributes of integrated bracelet watch, all steel form, satin and brushed finish, and then the legacy of Genta. If you don't already know, the watch we call today as Octo was originally offered in this very case shape but sold as a watch called Genta Octo. So yes, Bulgari Octo is a very original design of Genta, and all the octagonal curves and corners you see in the case profile was sketched, designed and produced by the same designer who designed Royal Oak and Nautilus. And since it also had inner and outer octagonal rings outside of main circular bezel, it made sense for Genta to name it Octo. Genta sold this watch under his own brand name until 2011 when he sold his watch company to Bulgari. And then Bulgari have kept the legacy of Genta, and we see the modern form of this watch as Octo Finissimo we are looking at in this video today. Now while Bulgari have also offered Octo in satin and brushed finish steel, which I will review separately in the coming weeks, in this video the reference we are looking at is all steel model offered in Sandblasted finish that has a monochromatic vibe and looks of its own, where not just all the case and bracelet have received matte and sandblasted finish, but every facet of it and even the dial comes in exactly same finish as the watch case or the bracelet. And this truly redefines the concept of integrated bracelet watch, as there's no as such discrimination between where the case or dial finish ends and the bracelet finish starts. One of the amazing attributes with Octo is the thinness, and Bulgari have gone to every extent and design factor to keep it as thin as possible. This watch, measured on my caliber, is only 5.09mm, and this is incredibly thin I have ever worn or shown on my channel. This was in fact the thinnest automatic watch in the world at the time of its release in 2017, the title that was later taken over by Piaget in 2018. If you're thinking that this watch comes only with painted hour markers as opposed to applied hour markers, that's also done in an attempt to achieve the watch thinness as you see today. The thinness of the case in the Octo is achieved by Bulgari's in-house movement caliber BVL 138, which is an incredibly thin movement and measures at only 2.23mm. The size of the watch is large at 40mm, which was probably a necessity for a movement this thin to house in and offer 60 hours of power reserve. The watch comes with platinum micro rotor to wind it with your wrist movements. The movement comes with beautiful detailing, and all the bridges come with Coats de Geneva stripes with polished bevels. The screws are all polished as well, and there's circular graining on the plate under the micro rotor. So overall, in my opinion, Bulgari hasn't left any stone unturned in decorating this movement. I checked the accuracy of this watch over a span of 2 days and changed its position between vertical and horizontal storage multiple times during the test period, and the watch gained only 5 seconds a day, which is an incredible accuracy for a non-COSC movement. Under the macro, the watch comes with decent details and the edges of our hand are smooth, but there are very small voids or something like small holes I can see on the hour hand. You can't see these with naked eye, but that's not the point here. The minute hand shows relatively same voids or surface flaws, which can again be spotted under the macro. But of course, it's not impressive, and I expected better. The seconds hand comes with similar finish as we saw on the hour and minute hand, and while it can again be seen under the macro only, in my opinion, Bulgari has a room for improvement. The painted hour markers are very crisp and there are no issues on site, and similar is the case with the consistency of surface treatment for the dial, and overall, not just the dial treatment is decent under macro, there's simply no flaw or quality issue on site. The text for Bulgari is also fine and there's attention to detail on display. On the wrist, the Octo wears large, but despite all the larger dimensions and substance it has to offer, it does not stick out of my wrist. I personally actually love the way it fills the wrist, and thanks to its thinness, it sits flush on the wrist and it almost looks like a band designed to contour the wrist. The wider bracelet at 30mm helps with how the watch hugs the wrist, and I personally love the looks and its aesthetics. Now, despite being a light and relatively thin watch, my biggest concern is that it is not just an uncomfortable watch, it has a design flaw that I simply can't wear it for more than 20 minutes. Although it is a beautiful watch and design, the problem with its angular design is the lugs at the outer edges where they sit on the wrist or back of the hand. The edges of the case lug corners are so sharp like a blade that upon wrist movement, every single lug will likely pinch your wrist like a razor. To me personally, since I have a flat wrist, it's not just uncomfortable, it actually hurts the skin, and if I wear it for longer, it will likely scratch it too. And since it is a very thin watch, these sharp corners of lugs will sit flat on your wrist rather than staying a little high up with an airspace with the wrist to avoid contact with the skin. I wore this watch for my wrist shots for around 20 minutes, and although I personally love the watch and bought it out of love, I simply can't wear it due to the inconvenience it has to offer. And you can see on my wrist the marks already left from the pointed edges of the lugs, only after a very small wear, which is truly very disappointing. I will also clarify that this may not apply to you if you don't have flatter wrists like myself, because in that case, these lugs will not sit flush on your skin. Rather, with rounder wrists, there will be an air gap between these lugs and your wrist, and in that case, no contact of lugs on skin means no pinching. Or if you wear your watches loose, it may also not apply to you, because your watch is already loose and light to avoid pinching at lugs. But if this happens to me, being someone who has worn and shown over 100 watches on the channel by now, it will most definitely happen to many. I analyzed it further to understand and see how the regular watches, the lugs taper inward, allowing free movement of the wrist. But as you can see in Octo, they stick out straight, which then not only restrict the wrist movement, but then due to pointed lugs, the watch will also pinch you. If Bulgari had at least rounded or slightly chamfered the lugs around the corners where they sit on the wrist, this problem may have been avoided. But that possibly would have come at the cost of pointed or squarish lugs. So I personally think it is indeed a beautiful watch, but only until you put it on the wrist, and then it may be painful. Another thing to point, which I personally didn't like, is that there's an air gap in the fitment of the bracelet with the case, and that nullifies the concept of integrated bracelet watch. The clearance between the bracelet and the case is consistent on both ends, and it just looks aesthetically unpleasing to see such gaps. And for me personally, it rather ruins the looks, and I think overall Bulgari could have executed this watch better. Bulgari Octo Finissimo is indeed a watch from the modern times, yet the characters and vibe of iconic designs from the past. The bolder looks and angular design on Octo is not merely a result of watch case, but a design from the same designer who sketched AP Royal Oak and Patek Philippe Nautilus. The engineering marvels and achievements then take Bulgari to another level, where it's not just the thinnest watch on the wrist, but is also incredibly light too. And then there's a beautiful movement on display that also offers 60 hours of power reserve. It does have all the bells and whistles you would expect and want in your luxury steel watch. But sadly for me personally, it only looked beautiful and amazing when I saw it on paper or screen. And then in real life, it is an unbelievably uncomfortable watch due to pointed and sharp corners of case lugs. The case corners for a flat wrist or the ones who wear the watches snug are so sharp that it's not just uncomfortable, it may possibly scratch your skin. This particular piece was also not a loan watch, rather I bought it out of my love for it. But sadly for me personally, it was only a beautiful watch until I put it on my wrist, and then it was a disaster.